Welcome to the B Shifter podcast. We have Dr. Daniel Madrzykowski coming up from UL Fire Safety Research Institute. He'll be on with us in a moment. First, I want to check in with Josh Bloom. How are you doing, Josh?
I'm doing great. How are you, John?
Good. Enjoying the weekend. We're here on Memorial Day when we're recording this, but we wanted to get together with Dan and talk about some important things that are going on in the fire service right now. So Dan's going to be on in a moment. We also have the grant season is open. We saw the guidelines for the new grant program is out. What do we know about AFG, especially when it comes to command training?
Yeah, so last week, AFG pushed out that the grant cycle is open. It's a very short window. I believe it's June 22nd is the last day to submit. So they gave about a month to submit grants. So Blue Card, command training, and certification remains at the top, really, of meeting the requirements of high priority things. So, command training as it relates to all of the NFPA standard parts and pieces that our system and certification addresses, and then the maintaining the certification part of it. So I had a lot of conversations this last week with folks that are applying for grants or applying to get more grants to maintain the certification or train more folks. So if you're looking for any grant information, you can reach out to me, josh@bshifter.com, and I can help you out with that, send you in the right direction to get you that information. I think we're already down to 27 days maybe or something. So pretty short window to get that taken care of, but whatever we can do to help you out, reach out and do what we can.
Very happy to welcome today's special guest, Dr. Dan Madrzykowski. He's a research engineer with the UL Fire Safety Research Institute, also known as FSRI, and one of the leading fire dynamic researchers in the world. His work has helped shape the modern fire service's understanding of fire behavior, ventilation, wind-driven fires, exterior fire attack, and tactical decision-making on the fire ground. Over the last 2 decades, Dan has led and contributed to groundbreaking research focused on firefighter safety, fire spread, and modern fire performance in buildings under fire condition. And his work has directly influenced operational tactics, training programs, and national conversations surrounding modern fire attack and command operations. If you've been to a Blue Card conference in the last several years, Dan has been there along the way with us, giving us his updates and sharing new information. We're proud to have him here today sharing new stuff with us. Welcome, Dr. Dan Madrzykowski from UL FSRI. Dan, thanks so much for being here with us today on the B Shifter podcast. And today we're going to talk about some fire dynamics that may exist outside of structures, because we often talk about fire dynamics inside structures, but fire dynamics apply anywhere combustion occurs. What are we still missing as the fire service when it comes to understanding outside fires and exterior fire spread and how that relates to fire dynamics?
John, Josh, good morning. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. As you both know, in the past 15 to almost 20 years now, there's been a clear definition of fire dynamics in structures, right? So a lot of the fire behavior that was taught in Firefighter 1, Firefighter 2 had to do a lot with chemistry, which is still valid, but not so much the fire dynamics piece. And as a result, SOPs for structures were based on the building construction or the occupancy type, and rarely included questions about where is the fire in the structure, how big is the fire in the structure, and where's the fire going to go in the structure. And so, again, over the past couple of decades, I think with the research that's gone on and the publication of NFPA 1700, the concept of fire dynamics in structures has gotten clearer, the difference between event-limited and a fuel-limited fire condition, and understanding that if you just add air to event-limited fire condition, the fire will grow, the heat release rate will increase, the fire hazard will increase, and that increase could be very rapid. We know that we need air for a flashover or a backdraft, or again, even a smoke explosion, and we're understanding now that that air might not be due to an action that we take or a failure of the building. But we see that as the fire grows and decreases and grows and decreases based on the oxygen availability, that it could be changing that ventilation where the neutral plane is in an open vent itself and causing such a response. Understanding flow paths, looking at the different parts of the building, trying to not operate in areas between where the fire is and where the fire wants to go, basically staying out of the exhaust portion of the flow path. You want to try to operate in the intake portion of the flow path, fight the fire on its own level. We know that pressure and flow moves the fire through the structure. We know that heated gases expand and cooled gases contract. So the importance of coordinating suppression with ventilation is very key. I think in structures, especially, commercial structures, there's still a misunderstanding perhaps about smoke in a building, that sometimes it would appear based on the ventilation practices that people feel that the amount of smoke in a building is fixed, and it's kind of like water in a bucket, and that if they can make more holes in the building fast, similar to making more holes in the bucket faster, that the water will come out of the bucket faster. And in the case of the bucket, that's true because the water's just sitting there. It's not reactive. It's not inert. So if you make more holes, you'll definitely drain the bucket faster. That's not true in a building. There's a fire in the building. The fire is a chemical reaction. And so by changing the ventilation only and allowing more air in the structure, you're actually making the fire bigger and the amount of smoke being produced is greater. So you see many times on YouTube or after action reports where, there's a hole, could be in a window open, flames coming out. There's a hole in the roof that's been made, flames coming out, or the fire vented itself. There's no more to do there until you get some water on the fire, because any other hole you make is just going to make that fire bigger, and in turn is going to reduce the structural integrity of that roof faster because you're bringing more heat into the building. And so I think that's still a place where there's some additional education needed in terms of structures. But then, as you point out, not all fires are in structures. We have fires outside of structures. We have fires in transportation vehicles. We have fires in vessels. We have fires in containers of all sort. So where do fire dynamics apply? We know they apply in residential structures. Everybody, I think, understands they apply in commercial structures, but these other structures we mentioned, outdoor fires, vehicle fires, construction equipment fires, shipboard fires, do they apply there? Certainly they do. Right. And that's a piece that we know hazmat folks go to. Yep, they understand that. But do the first responders, the first crews on the scene, do they understand that? And I think that's another area of learning and growth that we want to, that'd be a great thing to talk about today.
So from the research side, then, what are some of the biggest misconceptions that you see that folks in our business still have about exterior fires, and what are we missing when it comes to how they behave and extension into exposures?
I mean, from an exterior fire going in, you need to fight that fire from the exterior, right? You're not going to have much success trying to fight an exterior fire from the interior. So you might have a scenario where you knock the fire down in the compartment you're in, but that fire could be now extended into the attic. It could be extended into an adjacent room. Anybody that has seen the video or taken the training class on at training.fsri.org about the Lagrange fire will know that they had a fire that they did their 360 size up, and they saw that flames were coming out of windows, the D and C sides of the building, and extending up the building. The building had a very combustible exterior. It was a old home originally built in 1900 and covered with asphalt shingles as a siding material. And the crew went in. Initially, the front two rooms of the building were clear. They searched. The hose crew was there. They were together. They found the fire. They saw that a door that led to the rear portion of the house, which contained a bathroom, a hallway, and a kitchen, was hot, and the paint was blistering on that door. It was originally an exterior door when the house was first built, and then later the plumbing and everything, that portion of the house was added. They opened the door, they flowed water, they knocked the fire down, they got rid of the heat, and for all intents and purposes, they thought they were done. They were calling for a hook because they could hear some fire they thought was over their heads. They figured they had fire in the attic, and they were basically waiting for that hook to arrive. In the meantime, the incident commander is outside in the street, and he sees fire moving through the entry door that they had gone in a minute or so before. And so he tells them they've got, hey, 30 seconds to change conditions or they have to get out of there. And at that moment in time, they don't understand what the problem is. In the meantime, the incident commander is trying to get a backup line. He was originally sending a line around the D side, but again, it wasn't moving. It didn't get there fast enough to be active while the firefighters were making their way in the building. So now he told them to divert as they're now pulling the line in the front yard, go to the front porch and knock that fire down that's there. But before they could do that, the Mayday started. And what had happened was the exterior fire moved into the entry room where they had come in, and it had moved into another part of the building, flashed over that room, burnt through their hose line, and now they're trapped. They're looking for windows, and fortunately, all four of the firefighters that were trapped in there found windows, 3 different windows, and were able to get themselves out. But they all got burnt pretty badly. But again, their survival instinct, their training about how to get themselves out of a small space and doff your SCBA to get yourself out of that space in one case, how not to give up and keep searching to find, they had surveyed the room earlier when they were in there because it was fairly clear of smoke, and they knew there were windows there, and they kept, working to find those windows to get themselves out. Unfortunately, they got themselves out, but it was one of those situations that even though they were trying to do all the right things, the fire was ahead of them and they just couldn't catch up with regard to actions on the fire ground. And part of that is that they had this exterior fire in 2 locations that was spreading fire from the exterior to the interior. And I mean, this is nothing new. We've had situations in Loudoun County, Virginia. I believe it was Meadowwood Court, probably a good 20 years ago. Fire starts outside on a deck, and it spreads up the backside of the home and starts breaking into the windows, into the home on the first floor and the second floor. The crews are upstairs, and they get cut off once the fire gets into the first floor and have to jump out windows. So, I mean, there's dozens and dozens of examples like that. Many of them, fortunately, that were what we would, I guess, refer to as near misses, i.e., people only got injured, but others have been fatal. So it's really important that you take a line to the exterior, get a line moving to the exterior, and maybe it's not the first line, but you need to get a line to the exterior rapidly to handle that fire. If the first line is not going to the exterior, it's important to be flowing that first line while you're making entry. So again, if you have, you pop open the front door and heavy black smoke is rolling out, that's fuel that's above your head, right? You need to start flowing and flow and move right then, right? And that's a key piece. There's been other tragedies where the firefighters didn't flow immediately. They didn't protect their local position. They moved in the structure. They don't have to move in the structure very far. With now the open door behind them, that fresh air coming in as well as an exhaust vent, the fire rolls over them, overtakes them. Your PPE, your gear is not fireproof, right? It's meant to provide some limited protection to buy you time in an emergency condition to change your position, get isolated, get water flowing, or be able to back out. And so again, sadly, there have been a number of incidents there, whether we go to Cherry Road or wherever we, want to start talking about that conversation, again, from the 1990s through recent days where firefighters' lives have been lost. And it's really important to understand that flow and move concept. So you're providing continual cooling, at least for your location. So even if you can't be effective on that exterior fire, at least you're cooling your own location.
Back to the Lagrange incident real quick in that case study. We will include the link to that module in the show notes if folks are interested in that, because lots of lessons learned there, but that was a very small structure too, wasn't it? About 1,000 square feet.
Yeah,
So,
it wasn't even that. Yeah, it was a very small structure. The structure started out, as I recall, as two 16 by 16 foot rooms. And then it was joined together to be one house. And they added a little piece to the back.
and the one firefighter who narrowly escaped out of the bathroom after having to climb to a high bathroom window, it's just a miracle he got out of there. So great lessons learned there. So we'll include that in the show notes. So
Absolutely.
Dan, from a command perspective, then what critical factors do you think that we need to understand and focus on when we're dealing with these kind of fires? As IC1, the first arriver, and then IC2 as the incident continues to escalate.
I mean, there's a pretty good list of critical factors now in 1700. I think that Chris Stewart championed the chapter rewriting for that so that they could, line up. But again, Chief Brunacini, I didn't know him very well, but the dozen or so times that I had an opportunity to interact with him were pretty great. And he always said, he was thanking us for the work that we were doing with regard to a better understanding fire behavior and structures. And so he's like, he's got to get his folks to understand that the fire gets a vote, right? Those were his words. The fire gets a vote. And so anything with regard to critical factors, that is the key point. Where is the fire? How big is the fire? What is the building construction? How's the fire going to move through the building? Is it balloon frame construction? Is it lightweight construction that will basically allow the fire to run through open joists all across a floor or a void space, going from front to back or side to side of a structure? What's the smoke production? Of course, first and foremost, what's the life hazard, right? What's going on in this building? And I think the life hazard piece plays another role when we start to talk about some of these fires elsewhere outside of a structure. I think that's something we need to, we want to consider pretty heavily. I mean, just to bring one up now, an EV fire, for example, or any automobile fire. If there's no life hazard in the structure, that's really a time to take a breath. I'm sorry, in that vehicle, it's really a time to take a breath and say, what do we need to protect, right? What do we need to protect in terms of exposures? What do we need to do? Because the value of that vehicle is zero, right? Whether it's an internal combustion engine car or if it's a EV, if it's got fairly good flame involvement, there is no value to that vehicle anymore. So, what should the risk be in terms of firefighter engagement with that? And we're seeing with the EVs that in some degree, the best course of action and the fastest course of action may be after you initially knock it down and then realize that you still have batteries burning, you just let it burn. And it's going to burn. The fire will be much smaller than it was initially. It will appear to be less smoky in some regard due to the fact that your initial knockdown took the plastics out of play. And basically you have gases that are coming out of a battery that are burning. And, if you can just let it run its course, likely it'll be done in about a half hour or so, maybe a little more. But if you keep interfering with it and also exposing your firefighters to the chemicals that are coming out of that battery, putting them in close proximity to it, likely it's going to take longer. or the event may be over at the same time because the batteries still continue to burn out and your efforts may not have been effective. But now you've got folks that have heavier exposure that, you got to ask the question, why? The nice thing about letting the batteries burn out is you no longer have stored energy or stranded energy in the vehicle. You've taken away any shock hazard, and you've taken away the potential for reignition when the second responders, the tow truck drivers and those kind of folks get involved with the vehicle to take it away.
When we're looking at the EV fires, what concerns and where do you see, if you were just going to look at a crystal ball, where are we going in the next 5 years or so with how we handle the EV fires and the entire industry? Is there going to be a standard on how we address these?
I think the standard guidance that currently exists in the appendix is 1700 and will be further delineated and detailed by a report coming out of FSRI probably in July. I believe it's going to the tech panel this month for review. First and foremost, if you have a car that's involved in fire and that you show up to on the roadway, the likelihood that you're going to recognize that it's an EV is low, right? There's no standardized badging. There's no standardized marking. Many of the folks that sell EVs have models that are internal combustion engine vehicles, and then they have a similar model that's also could be a plug-in hybrid or could be a full battery-powered vehicle. So your ability to tell that's going to be low. So again, first you're checking, is there life hazard? Everybody's out of the car. You want to approach that car, any car really, any vehicle fire from the upwind side if you can. You're fully in gear before you approach the car, right? SCBA on air. Park the rig uphill if you can, upwind and uphill if you can. Approach the car from a 45-degree angle, because whether it's an EV or whether it's an internal combustion engine vehicle, there are struts, airbags, various things that can fly out of there, and use the reach of the stream and knock the bulk of the fire down. So any parts of the passenger compartment or the cabin, if you will, that are plastic and whatnot, once the water hits that'll go out very quickly. Tires, give them, knock them down. Any exterior plastic or fiberglass that's on fire, sweeping the hose over that quickly will knock that down. So you ought to be able to have the bulk of the fire knocked down in a minute or so, right? And then if you see that you still have flames, might look like pulsing jet flames or unsteady flames, they're growing and coming back, and they're coming from under the car, they're coming out of the wheel wells, then likely you've got a battery fire. So now you need to think about, we're going to need more water. So you need to get another engine company or a tanker or what have you headed toward your location, because you're going to need some more water. And you're looking at your exposures and, what are we going to do? So, there was a battery energy storage system fire in California, was being transported on a truck, and it flipped over on a bridge. And while they were trying to figure out how to move it, it exploded and started to burn. And they sized that up and said, we don't want the runoff going into the river under this bridge, water runoff going in the river under this bridge, so we're just going to let it burn. And they had some lanes of that bridge closed, I think, for over 24 hours, because, again, a battery energy storage system, a lot more batteries, a lot bigger volume, a lot more potential energy, but they just let it go. And that, for them, turned out to be the best solution in terms of not causing any potential any worse environmental damage than the fire itself, and getting the fire under control, and the box moved. So again, the EV is a smaller scenario, but again, treat all car fires the same, and it's so very important to be on air when you're approaching that fire and use the reach of the stream. There are a lot of other tactics that will be shown in the FSRI report, the Fire Safety Research Institute report. They used blankets. They used undercar nozzles. They used some agents. And in large part, the blankets may offer some opportunities, again, for an exposure protection when you're outside. You don't want to tie the blanket tight because the blanket does not stop thermal runaway. And therefore, you've got gases like hydrogen building up in the blanket, and that could lead to a potential for a fireball, a deflagration, an explosion of some sort. And again, we issued alert on that about a year or so ago, right after we ran the tests along with NFPA, to let the fire service know they've got to be aware of this. And it may be a situation where you may want to put a chain or a hook on the blanket and, remotely lift part of the blanket periodically in a safe direction and let it vent in that direction, so you're not having this buildup of gases. So again, I think the report will detail it's basically got a flow chart in it that they're building to help give people an idea of, if this condition, then go there or not. But it all really starts out with treating all vehicle fires the same in that regard. But there's not just automobile fires. And there was an incident in Greene County, Georgia, I guess a little more than a year ago now. I guess actually in September, it's going to be 2 years. And Battalion Chief Chris Eddy lost his life in that fire. And the fire was a tractor trailer that was going down a highway. And the driver noticed, I guess, that the brakes or the tires were smoking on his tractor. And he was looking for a place to pull over. And before he could find a place to pull over, they caught fire. And so he stopped his rig on the highway, and he was pulling a refrigerated trailer. And the refrigerated trailer was full of frozen meat. And as the fire from the tires spread into the trailer, got the refrigeration unit involved, got the trailer involved, got the diesel, one or two of the diesel fuel tanks involved by the time the fire department arrived. And fire department arrived, and they started to knock down the fire from the exterior using the reach of the stream. And unfortunately, there was heavy smoke around the trailer. The trailer has been involved in the fire. And as Chief Eddy was going to open the rear doors on the trailer, before he had the chance to actually open the door, there was an explosion. And the one door swung and hit and killed the battalion chief. The other door that was still firmly latched blew off and flew across the highway. And again, there was cell phone video of this, so that shortly after the incident, I think it was on most of the fire service websites. NIOSH did a pretty thorough report, and they asked us to get involved. And so we had one of our advisory board members that happened to be in Georgia go down and meet with the fire chief and collect some samples of the foam that lines the trailer. And so for a refrigerated trailer, there's a fairly thick chunk of foam that fills the void between the inner and outer walls, the ceiling, the floor, and the exterior walls. And so the fire had gotten into this fuel. Any foam plastic, as you know, has a pretty high energy level, a higher heat of combustion than plain wood, sometimes 1.5 to 2.5 times. So it's got a lot of energy per pound that it can release. They don't burn effectively in 21% oxygen, which is the amount of oxygen that we have in our air that surrounds us. So they really need extra oxygen to burn clean. A good example of that would be acetylene gas. As you know, if you just light acetylene gas and don't add additional oxygen, you get a sort of weak flame, very sooty. So there's a lot of fuel left in that gas, in the unburnt gases. Whereas if you add additional oxygen, it gets really hot and burns clean. So there was no recognition that there's a ventilation limited fire condition in that trailer. right? And we know that if you open it up, it's going to get worse. And in this case, perhaps because the trailer had self-vented due to the fire, unfortunately, the fire chief was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. But again, we want to start thinking about this closed vessel. This is a pressure vessel in effect. How do we cool that off? Penetrating nozzle, right? How can we get water in there to cool it off without entraining extra air? So, I mean, these are some of the things, that you want to be thinking about. And, sadly, in Maine recently, another firefighter lost his life, and several other firefighters are injured and recovering, and it was in a silo, right? So, silo doesn't have a lot of windows and doors on the outside. So if we've got a fire in a silo, what fire dynamics apply there, right? Seems like it's a vent limited condition. Now, we don't know any of the details about what type of silo they had or any of that kind of thing. But in general, if you've got a fire in a closed container like that, if you can cool it off by, poking a hole in it and getting water in there, again, depending on what kind of fuel is inside, that may be the way to go, as opposed to opening a ground level door, low vent, good intake, and then the fire is looking for a high exhaust. And we talked about earlier, we know that changes in ventilation usually trigger flashovers, backdrafts, and smoke explosions. So that's a decision that's got to be made carefully. And one of the things is, if you can get effective water shortly after you open up, then you're likely going to be okay. But the key word there is effective water. And in something like a big commercial structure or a silo or something like that, you cannot always be guaranteed that your initial water flow is going to be effective. It's going to get to the seat of the fire right away. So that's a challenge. Or is it in Garden Grove, California? They've got an incident with a methyl methacrylate tank. I think they've evacuated 40,000 people. And what are they concerned with? They're concerned with the fact that there may be a self-heating chemical reaction going on with that tank, that the temperature's building. And they're concerned that that will cause the tank to fail. And once the tank fails and there's a leak, now we are going to introduce more air into that process. And again, the vapors coming off of this are highly volatile. And so that could cause a, potential explosion, fire, who knows? But again, in that particular case, given the scenario and the folks that are responding, they recognize that they're doing the best they can to cool it, take the life hazard away by the evacuations, and continue to work the problem very slowly and methodically, thinking through every step. And that's, I think that's critical. So and in the UK, they've got a system that they teach and they employ for their incident commanders. And basically they look at the fire scene, and before they key up the radio and tell people what to do, they want the fire incident commanders to ask themselves two questions. What am I trying to achieve by giving this order? And what do I think the result will be? Will this tactic, will this series of tactics or this strategy result in the outcome that I want? Just to give yourself a couple of seconds to really think it through again, so you're not kind of on autopilot. You're not doing this is what we always do, but that you really assess the situation that you've got. You've taken all the data that you collected while you're arriving to the scene, and people talking to you, or you talking to witnesses or whatever, and using that data to come up with your incident action plan.
Yeah. So one thing that we've been pushing, Dan, is when you get there, evaluating the critical factors based on that, our strategic decision-making model that, is published all over the place. But so what is the problem, which is what you've been talking about the whole time. So identifying what is the problem, because our industry seems to get there and say, well, they called us to make it better, so we just have to take action when we get there. But we have to identify the problem first. So what is the problem? And then the second part of it is, what can we do to solve the problem, and then what's standing in the way of us solving the problem. So that's kind of part of our critical thinking decision-making class. And a lot of that class is based on, on structures, different critical factors, different buildings, different fire conditions, different life safety profiles, all of that. But, it's applicable to every kind of incident that we would respond to. So I think, like you identified from the hazmat incident in California going on, it seems like you want to get there and do something, but it's like, well, if you just take a second and let's think about what's the plan going to be, and let's not make it worse, but what are we going to do to, try to make it better? And
of course, this is where the training is very important, because if you don't have that experience, that life experience or that fireground experience, what are you drawing from to make that? Do I want to do plan A or plan B? Where does that come from? And that's why, training, going to, and we see the folks going to FDIC and other regional trainings and whatnot. That's why it's all so important to try to, group think, if you will, learn from other people's experience. So you start building that. We used to call it the slide tray in your head, the Rolodex in your head, I guess the streaming service in your head. I'm not sure what we call it today, but
The hard drive.
The hard drive, yeah.
I had a thought about stored energy, and I think our underestimation on stored energy and where stored energy is. And one of the incidents that happened out west in California was a tire that simply exploded on a large truck. What's the cascade events of something like that, an outside fire in a large vehicle that leads to a tire explosion and ultimately an LODD?
Yeah, it's I believe the incident you're referring to is with the loss of life of firefighter Andrew Pontius from LA County. Again, that happened. We're coming up on the 2-year anniversary in June. So they were called to a large piece of construction equipment that had started on fire. And it was in as I remember, a gravel pit area. So there were really no exposures to speak of. While the fire department was arriving, one of the tires exploded and threw shrapnel at least 150 feet and broke a windshield of a pickup truck that was parked about 150 feet away. And so again, the fire department arrives. They have a big earth mover type machine. The tires are about 6 feet tall or so, and they want to put the fire out. And again, similar to what we talked about for the automobiles, these tires basically have a blast range. And when we started to look into the injuries from these tires, big commercial tires like that, if you will, tractor trailer tires or construction equipment tires, when the mechanics operate on those tires, they operate to take them off a rim, put them on a rim, assemble the rim. They operate on them in large cages, so that if they do explode, the cage will hold the pieces in and it won't hit somebody. There's a lot of records in the medical field of people losing arms or jaws or things like that due to these tires or these rims coming apart. And so there were some studies done in Russia, interestingly, where they had a similar situation, and they looked at the blast radius. And so LA County took some of that information and put out a safety bulletin. And basically, they want you to approach these fires from a 45-degree angle again. You don't want to be in front of the tire. In front of the tire, 10 feet, 30 feet is kind of a lethal range. And knowing that in front of the tire, that could extend, depending on the size of the tire, that could extend up to 350 feet. So, do you have a person that you need to go in quick and grab and drag away? Or if there's no life hazard there, again, this is a time to stay clear of the situation, stay to the side of the situation, and start thinking about what the best practice is. Do you need to get a monitor nozzle going to try to cool the environment, or is this beyond everything? There's no exposures, let it do its thing. So that's important to think, because when a tire is effectively a pressure vessel, and it's made out of rubber, right? Or some rubber composite. And so if there's a fire that is heating the tire, that tire is losing its structural integrity. But also, if the fire is heating the tire, what is it doing to the pressure inside that pressure vessel? Pressure's going up, right? Temperature goes up, pressure goes up. That's the ideal gas law. They're related that way. So not only is the tire being heated and the pressure's increasing and the wall or a portion of the tire is getting weakened, we're also off-gassing the tires made of fuel. And so now we're creating a fuel vent-limited fire condition inside that tire. So when the fire does hit it, it could just be a release of the pressure that's built up, or it could actually be an explosive event from igniting that fuel in the tire as well. So, I mean, there's a lot of potential things that can go on there. Hazard is really high. And again, I don't think that's recognized in large part by the fire service. So again, just, where do fire dynamics apply? Anywhere there's a fire, they apply, and you've got to start thinking about how does this work in this situation. So exterior fire to the tire, and that tire is really dangerous. So especially the bigger the tire is, it goes without saying, the more stored energy in that vehicle. So, or in that rubber pressure vessel. So again, I think that to honor firefighter Pontius and never forget that, that's another lesson that needs to be shared across the fire service. I mean, there's trucks running up and down the highways everywhere, there's construction equipment everywhere. Again, fortunately, most of them are not on fire, but for that rare occasion where it is, again, it's another case where training is needed, because how many times did that crew go to a piece of construction equipment fire, right? So they're using the lessons they had learned from structures or other fires, and maybe those lessons weren't complete enough to help them understand what the hazard and the risk was here.
One of the alternative fuels that we see in these larger vehicles, particularly trash trucks, city buses, CNG. We know that there are special hazards with that, special extinguishment techniques. What can you tell us about what we're finding out about CNG fires with the larger vehicle?
Well, I think the key thing with the CNG is that you don't treat a propane tank and a CNG tank the same, right? So a propane tank, you want to cool it. You're trying to cool it all the time. And with the CNG tank, cooling it could actually lead it to explode, because the way they're valved and release pressure is different. They're designed differently. And I think there was an incident where a couple of firefighters were injured in LA City, maybe a couple of years ago, with the scenario where they didn't know what kind of fuel tanks they had. So again, this is a place where you got to take a pause or have a good pre-plan. If you know all your city buses and trash trucks are CNG, then you want to practice in how do we handle a CNG tank? How do we appropriately control that? But again, if you have some vehicle that's going through town that caught fire and you don't know what it is, it's important to understand what it is. So maybe you start off with exposure protection while letting that burn and trying to figure out what kind of fuel tank do we have on that vehicle. And again, getting some people clear, giving it some space. I think, I guess maybe another lesson. So there's a lot of tools that firefighters have access to, maybe a deck gun, maybe a portable monitor. And I think in many ways, the firefighters think of those as defensive tools as opposed to offensive tools. And so I think, again, that's something else that might need to be clarified for folks. I mean, there could be situations where you've got a mid-rise apartment building on fire, or all sorts of things where you might want to use one of those offensively, or perhaps a commercial vehicle fire where you might want to have enough standoff distance and use one of those offensively while you're trying to figure out where you need to be and what else you need to do. But again, that could give you a quick hit to knock down the plastics, the tires, and sort of clarify what's burning and what the situation is. I mean, do you see that in your interaction, that people think mostly about, oh, that's plan C, that's if we go defensive, as opposed to, you know what, the thing we could use right now is one of these ground monitors to give this a quick hit.
Yeah, I think oftentimes you've said it a couple times. We continue to take residential tactics to everything we go to, because probably 95% of what's out there from training standpoint, or what you see on YouTube, is talking about residential fires. Whether you're talking about, fire dynamics, fire tactics, victims search, isolated searches, you name it, and our industry needs to give a little bit more focus, I think, to this changing fire environment that we're dealing with, which is not just the fire, but everything that has to do with the fire, all the critical factors that we have to deal with. Every day, there's probably something new that we don't even know is available or coming out that's going to create another challenge for us. And I always try to line it up to we evaluate the conditions, and we say standard conditions all the time, and it's like, well, what does that really mean? Well, standard conditions are the critical factors that are there. So, like, what is the problem? And it seems people understand this one. We go to Mrs. Smith's house for abdominal pain, or go to Mrs. Smith's house for chest pain. We're just not going to shock her. Well, the fire department, old school, because of maybe lack of training, we continue to take this same action. Well, in EMS, we do evaluate critical factors of the patient, and we take action the best we can based on that. So we identify these critical factors, and then for whatever these standard conditions are that are critical factors, we figure out what action we're going to take that lines up with those particular factors. Not, we only have this small playbook and this is what we apply to everything. It's, what's the problem? What are we going to do about the problem so that we end up with some sort of a standard outcome? And I don't think we can reiterate enough that, because you haven't had the experience with it, we haven't had the experience, not you, Dan, but like our industry hasn't had the experience with it. We have to learn from other people. So what we're talking about today, just doing a tabletop, talking about CNG fires, or the big tires on fire, the tractor trailer tires on fire. Here we have Rumpke is the trash and recycling, one of the big trash and recycling companies. Well, most everything they have there, they produce methane, and they have methane spots there because they're basically making their own fuel for all their own vehicles. So, it's a genius kind of thing for them, but we have to understand what that risk is of these factors, not apply the standard conditions we do at residential house fires to all these other buildings.
Yeah, very true. And I think another link we will want to put in your podcast page is for the Chula Vista warehouse fire. Chula Vista Fire Department was a great fire department to work with. Southern California has a great system of looking at after actions with the blue sheet and the green sheet, and bringing together a group of folks from mutual aid departments in the area to facilitate that process. And, there was a case where they're in a building, it's full of smoke, full of hot fuel. Visibility is limited to non-existent. There are some other features that come into play where the thermal imager is not providing the officer with reliable information due to some airflow and mixing in the area where he's located. And they're looking for venting the roof to make it better for them so they can make an effective attack on the fire, not knowing that they're about 80 feet from the fire. In between them are solid joists on the ceiling, so they can't flow water across the ceiling very far, and shelving that goes up within, shelving and product that goes up within a foot or inches of the ceiling, again, providing obstruction. And so what our modeling shows pretty clearly, which is why it's because the building's big enough, as they successively made heat holes starting from the area near the area of origin and working toward the crew that got injured, you just see how the fire is spreading across from the A side of the building to the C side of the building. and getting bigger and bigger, and eventually resulted in burning down the warehouse. But again, it comes back to this: once you've got flame out of a hole, or once you've got a really good vent but you don't have effective water on the fire, that's the time to hold up a little bit. And we have a more, and the reason we know that this education is still lacking. We had the Sofa Superstore fire with the Charleston 9, and folks that are old enough remember the video that once they took all the plate glass windows in what they felt was a desperate attempt to get in and rescue, that caused a rapid transition of flashing over that whole showroom floor. Flames were filling all those vents very quickly afterwards. In San Antonio, firefighter Deem, where he lost his life, there was another firefighter that was on the radio, and he's calling for help. He's issuing his mayday. And what he's asking them for is to basically open up the building. He's in a vent limited condition, that he's got no visibility, he can't find his way out, and he's surrounded by hot fuel gases. So the last thing he should be asking for is ventilation, because again, that could result in killing him. But it's in the NIOSH report, what's going on there. They need to flow water. And fortunately, in that incident, a fourth due engine company picked up a hose line, and the officer of that engine company recognized the environment, that this whole thing's about to flash over, and his crew start flowing water into that gym in that strip mall and cooling it off. And then they were able to get some other folks out. Sadly, the timing wasn't such that firefighter Deem could be saved, but others were saved as a result of that action. So again, understanding the fire behavior, whether it's in a structure, whether it's a fire affecting a vehicle. Just last week, we released a report looking at lithium-ion battery-powered micromobility device fires in passenger trains, in a passenger car, to see how rapidly that hazard spreads and grows. Because again, the transportation industry, we haven't seen this before. So what does this look like? What can we learn from? How can we change our operations to make it safer for the passengers? Or perhaps what size batteries do we need to restrict, and that kind of thing? We see it daily in the airplane. Well, almost daily. Seems like there's a change every couple of weeks about the aircraft industry saying, hey, you gotta, don't put your vape pens up in the, in the overhead anymore. You got to keep them with you, or any kind of battery pack. You got to keep it with you so we can see it, so we can see if it's going to smoke, or you can tell if it's overheating. So they have bags and a suppression system that they use on the aircraft. So they want to make sure that the source of the fire is readily accessible, so they can get it in a bag, fill it with water, close it down, and keep the fire from spreading. So we're understanding there's 200 to 300 of those incidents a year now on aircraft. So we're all learning, and then that's why training, keeping up, being a student of the job is so important. Not everybody has federal mandates that can go across rapidly, like perhaps the airline industry does, that this is what's going to happen now, or at least a company that says, this is what we're going to do now. The American Fire Service is made up of, about 30,000 fire departments and 30,000 chiefs, and everybody's got their own SOPs. The point of 1700 was to try to provide a common platform for fire departments to look at, and a starting point. And of course, what's in their first due, what their staffing is, what their resources are, all that plays a role in, as you know, and deciding what their response is going to be. But at least 1700 gives them a starting point for that. But clearly, going across the U.S., we're not there. Other countries have sort of statewide, if you will, or federal fire service, so they all follow the same rule, direction, may have the same equipment. Again, the U.S. is a different animal, and for many reasons, it's a good thing that it is, based on the variety of terrains, towns, and whatnot. But one thing that we're seeing is that there's some homogenization, whether it's where data centers are showing up across the United States, or where large mega warehouses are showing up across the United States. All these have their potential hazards. And in many cases, that the hazards are going to be to the fire service. So lots to learn, lot of things to do.
Dan, my head is swimming as always with all this information you bring, and we really appreciate you being here on a Memorial Day of all days too. Dan's taking his day off to spend some time with us. As we look to wrap this up, is there one takeaway that you'd want firefighters and command officers to remember about fire dynamics at outside fires, outside the structure fire environment? What would that takeaway be?
I mean, for the first due company officers and the incident commanders, be thinking about, applying the fire dynamics, right? Is this really a different kind of vent limited fire? And how do I need to handle that? Am I really looking at a pressure vessel here? What are the hazards that this is going to bring? So what you're doing your size up, whether it's a size up of a structure or if it's size up of a heavy piece of equipment or a tractor trailer on fire on the side of a road, do that size up and then follow your strategy and your course of tactics based on the size up. Many times, effectively, the officer did a size up or the incident commander did a size up, but they either didn't communicate how this fire was going to be different, and everybody just did the normal thing, as opposed to saying, you know what, given the information that we've gotten from this fire, this is what we're going to do. And I think there's two pieces, and this is for structures as well. Use known information to develop your incident action plan to the extent you can. Once you cross the threshold going in a structure, or perhaps move around to the other side of the exterior fire, what have you, you may have some unknown things that occur. So if your expectation of what you thought this tactic was going to do, if it's not happening in the first 15 seconds, 30 seconds, something like that, you've really got to be ready with a plan B and be ready to pivot, right? Well, what do we do now? This didn't work. In many cases, from incidents where there have been injuries or a line of duty death, you'll see scenarios where they kept trying to do plan A over and over, or for an extended period of time, when they really needed a change. They needed to do something different. So, study, understand fire behavior. It's critical. It's a key part of your job, and be ready for a plan B.
Dan, thanks again. Hey, before you go, will you stay with us for a timeless tactical truth from Alan Brunacini?
Oh, absolutely. Love it.
This is a timeless tactical truth from Alan Brunacini, and this one's pretty simple. Don't take little habits into a big fire. We have muscle memory, and I think especially when we're talking about vehicle fires, we look at that being less risky, more routine, something we go to on a regular basis with little consequence. But we're seeing more roadway fires, especially because of the energy systems that we have, that quite possibly could be impacted by bad habits that we have from regular combustion burning vehicle fires that we've gone to so much in the past. Well, Dan, thank you for being here today. We appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your Memorial Day weekend, and we look forward to getting back together with you soon.
And thank you for being flexible to accommodate my schedule. I appreciate it.
We appreciate you being here. Thanks, Dan.
Bye.
And that concludes today's B Shifter podcast. We want to thank you for listening and being a part of this. Please share it with a friend and subscribe, and we'll talk to you next week on B Shifter.